Welcome to the Spectrum Lounge podcast, where we discuss creatives of color changing the game in TV, film, and pop culture. I am your host, Rebecca Theodore-Vachon, and on this episode, I am joined by Vilissa Thompson, social worker, disability consultant, and founder of Ramp Your Voice, as we discuss the themes of grief and trauma in Marvel Studios' Wakanda Forever and the horror thriller Smile. Hey, Vilissa, welcome back to the Spectrum Lounge.
Hey, Rebecca, it's so good to be back. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
And so I'm so glad that you reached out to me. I think it was a couple of weeks ago where you were like, hey, maybe we should, I would love to talk about the themes of grief and trauma in Wakanda Forever. And I was like, yes, let's do that.
Yes.
Yeah. If anyone, Vilissa had been on the Spectrum Lounge back in 2020. We had done an episode on the stream on the themes of generational trauma in Lovecraft Country, and so that was a great discussion. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to dig into. Yeah, so Wakanda Forever, second week in theaters. I think going on week 3. And for context, we know that the lead actor, Chadwick Boseman, who played T'Challa and Black Panther, passed away, unfortunately,
Yes.
after battling colon cancer. And so they had a script for the original Black Panther 2, and they basically had to throw it away. And Ryan Coogler and the co-screenwriter, Joe Robert Cole, had to come up with a whole brand new story for this sequel. And, of course, there were a lot of feelings about whether they should cast T'Challa. Ryan Coogler and the executives at Marvel Studios came to the decision that they were not going to recast. And so therefore, T'Challa, they also wrote that T'Challa passed away on screen. So that's what the movie opens with. We basically see Shuri rushing to find a cure for an unknown illness, right? And I'm like, wow, okay, that's pretty timely,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We're right under COVID, and unfortunately, we see T'Challa dies off screen, and so there's this huge funeral. And basically, Wakanda Forever is really about what the nation of Wakanda and also how his loved ones and his family have to go on without him. So I just wanted to start with you, like, what were your thoughts as how they handle the themes of grief and trauma in Wakanda Forever?
I really like how they didn't beat around the bush about, you know, the obvious death,
Mm-hmm.
of the Black Panther. And I did like how they connected it somewhat to an illness, with Chad having cancer, things of that nature. So I really like that connection in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So I just glad that it just wasn't drug on in the movie. We had just right off the gate,
Mm-hmm.
we see that a tragedy has happened. We see them mourning. We see them doing a whole, rituals, honoring, his death.
Mm-hmm.
And what really struck me was just how real those scenes were. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you have death scenes in movies or TV, the cast, they have the emotions of it, to where it feels real. But this right here felt realer than real. Like the sadness, just the hurt. You could just feel it on everybody's
Yeah.
faces, in the words and the body language. And that this was a real scene. That this wasn't just acting. Like they were really mourning Chadwick in that moment. Of course, it was his character, but it was really about Chadwick in that moment. And it was so heavy, but also done beautifully,
Mm.
and yeah, I just loved that. I just love how it was the most probably realistic death and funeral scene I have seen in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I said this in the podcast before when I reviewed Wakanda Forever, is that I think part of the viewing experience for a lot of people going to see this movie is that we aren't the same people,
No.
right? Like personally, nationally, like we're
Right.
living under a pandemic where we saw a million people die
Yeah.
globally,
And
right?
still dying.
and still dying. Thank
Still
you.
dying.
You know, there's no post pandemic here.
No.
Like we're about to go into the winter. We're about to be hit with COVID and the
Yep.
flu, and then what is that? RSV? Is that
Yep.
the new thing that they found? And I mean, not in addition to the global pandemic, police brutality,
Yeah.
seeing videos of George Floyd and just, you know, Breonna Taylor. Like it was just, you know, and then the BLM protests and then being sequestered and being separated from our loved ones and family. And so I feel like we're just like down to like a molecular level. We're just different as Black people in this country. We're just different, you know?
We
So
are.
yeah, so
And
I feel like we were coming into that movie with our respective grief and trauma, you know?
oh, definitely. And just to, kind of add on to that, just realizing, the heaviness of this time. People have not been given the space to grieve.
Yeah.
It's the return back to work, work hustle and all that BS that folks trying to do, and realizing that people are really hurting. People are not okay by many means. Some of the things you listed with the summer uprisings of 2020 alone, that really shook a lot of people, in ways of seeing George Floyd's death. We had Breonna Taylor, all around that time. And, people are changed. And we don't, as a society, give room to recognize those changes and what that means for people's ability to be present, to feel loved, to feel protected, to feel safe. You know, we just had, at the time of recording, another, shooting at a gay club.
Yep.
Like it's constant. And then like what earlier, like the other week, we had the 3 football players who were shot, at the University of Virginia. Like it's always some type of tragedy that we're holding, and it's never ending. It's never ending, on top of just regular life stuff, much less the things you may see in the news. Regular
Right.
life stuff, along with the pandemic of, being a disabled person. I know I'm, working on a piece about how do you function as a disabled person when everybody else trying to be back to normal, and there is no
Mhm.
normal. you know and the realities of realizing that some of us are very isolated. We were already isolated before, but these last particularly 2 years have been so isolating
Yeah.
on top of that. And then kind of going back to the film, us being forever changed by not being able to see Chadwick in this role anymore. Like I still remember that night when the news about him came about, and I didn't want to believe it at first. I was like, "What is this? Like Chadwick Boseman dead? Like what's going on?" And then the shock. I don't think a celebrity death like that hit me as hard in a long time. And then
Agree.
culturally, we are not the same either, because Chadwick meant so much to us. Like just the excitement of 2018 when that movie came out and everybody making him do the salute. You seeing him, out there, and to realize that we will never have that again. Like I didn't. It was heartbreaking, and it just in the matter of 4 years, it just so much has changed with this cast and just with us as a people and a society.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like I was watching that movie, like I braced myself because I was like, first we knew that they were going to write him out and that he was going to die on screen. I don't think that was a spoiler, but it didn't make it any less sad or any less um like with the funeral scene. I mean, that funeral scene was just shot so beautifully,
It
and
was. It
the
was.
costumes, and like you said, like I don't think they were acting. Like I think that
No.
was really them. Like the part that broke me was when Shuri puts her hand over T'Challa's casket and then she
Yeah.
just breaks down.
Yeah.
Because up until then, I feel like she was there. She was trying to be strong for her mother, was
Right.
trying to be strong for Ramonda, and then it's just idea like that was her big brother because we saw like, and I think that was one that was definitely Letitia on a real life level.
Oh
She
yeah.
and Chadwick were very 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 close, and so that came through in their performances from the first Black Panther. Like I love their relationship as brother and sister.
Yeah.
Um, and then for her to realize like, wow, he's not. here anymore. So when she broke down, I was just like, I don't know how much of that was acting or if that was, actually Letitia, but it was heartbreaking.
It
You know?
was.
Yeah, nonetheless. And so let's talk about, because when we so after there's a time jump of a year after, right?
Hmm.
But what's interesting is to see like how T'Challa's death has like changed each of the characters. So I guess we'll start with Ramonda, because with Ramonda I felt like there were certain decisions and things that she did in the movie that I felt that she was coming out of, that were coming out of a trauma response. Like of course she's the queen, and now she is on the throne, right? Now she's lost her husband and she's lost her son. So now she has to step into this leadership role. And then like how do you balance that with leading a nation, with like still being a mother to your surviving child, and then also having to deal with her personal grief. Like, how did you feel that they handled Ramonda's storyline
I
as far as?
think, honestly, I feel like she represents what Black women do.
Mm,
Black
mm-hmm.
women are still, no matter the pain that we're holding, we
Yeah.
still have to show up. And that's just how I looked at her. Like, she is a mother. She lost her husband. She was a wife who lost her husband, and now she lost her son. But she's still showing up, doing what she had to do. People still had expectations of her. And it made me think about, when did she have the time to break down and grieve? Who
Mm-hmm.
was there for her? If anyone was, because she's the queen.
Wow. Now
Who
that's,
could be there for the queen?
I'm trying to remember in the movie who that was. I don't know. I don't really have
No,
the answer for that.
no. Because, as any mother, I would imagine she wouldn't want Shuri to worry about her.
Mm-hmm.
Our parents, most parents don't want their children to worry about them. Like, she's not going to cry to Shuri,
Yeah.
about her brother. But
Mm-hmm.
who is going to comfort the queen in her moment? So for me, she just represents what Black women have to do when we have such significant, indescribable pain, that we go on that journey alone. And I think that, too, what you said, some of our actions and behaviors is impacted by that trauma, because grief is traumatic. And that's something that we don't fully recognize, is that grief is another form of trauma. And I just think that some of her actions in the movie, I know we'll get to it a little bit later on, like, when it comes to her own death, was, to me, attributed to her grief, and in so many ways. I just felt for her. Like, when she went in front of the UN Council, it was like, what more do I have to give?
Mm-hmm.
I have lost everything.
Right.
Like, that scene, let me tell you, Angela Bassett, if she don't get awards, is a
Yeah.
travesty.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is like that speech that she gave, but like, haven't I given everything? So what was interesting was like, because you and I had both commented on it on Twitter when the first trailer for Wakanda Forever came out, which was, or that was the same weekend as Comic-Con, right?
Yeah.
And so we saw the trailer. And so the way that, and see, this is why I forget the people that actually cut, the producers that actually cut the trailer, they're on Wakanda, they're on Twitter. And I'm like, you guys deserve a freaking Oscar, because it was sort of a misdirection, right? Because we thought that when she made that powerful speech, like, haven't I, I'm thinking she's talking to like, this United Nations Council, and then come to find out, no, she's talking
Yeah.
to Okoye, right? Like, and I was like, oh, okay, this is totally different. That's not what happened. So what it is when you actually see her giving that speech and seeing who she actually directed it to, the whole context of that speech, while still powerful, it did kind of change it a little bit, because now she's talking to another Black woman. She's talking to Okoye,
Right.
who I think, I feel like Ramonda and Okoye had sort of a close relationship, but there was still some unresolved trauma from the first Black Panther, right? I'll let you talk about that, because I just thought that that scene was
Yeah. I
powerful.
just,
Yeah.
I just feel that sometimes, I feel that with trauma, a response like that can be directed to someone whom you want to blame. It's easy to blame her for something instead of realizing that what happened is out completely out of your control.
Yeah.
And I just felt that in that moment, she directed to someone. It was a person that she could really get into it, deeply. And that was it. Like, that was her dumping her trauma in that way. And was it fair? You can judge for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
No, but
Mm-hmm.
the reaction of receiving that trauma was so significant.
Ooh, Okoye. Oh, Danae Guerrero, like her face, like
Like,
she just looks so devastated. Like, because she was already coming in, like, just for context, Shuri and Riri had been taken by the Taliban. And
yes,
so now Okoye had to come back because, she's the leader of the Dora Milaje. She had been on that mission with Shuri, and now she has to come back and tell the queen and the mother,
yeah,
oh, I lost your child. And what the twist in it was, Okoye was the one who insisted that Shuri come on this mission. Now, I don't think there was any malice
no,
on Okoye's side. I think she saw that Shuri was grieving because she was just, kind of locked herself in her science lab. And I think Okoye was just like, I think this trip will be good for her, just to give her some purpose, just to get out or whatever. And plus, I think she actually respects Shuri's intellect. So I think Okoye was definitely coming from a space of good intentions.
oh yes,
But
yes,
again, now you have to come back to your queen, because the relationship is complicated, because in a way, like, yes, she has this close relationship with Ramonda, but Ramonda is also her boss. Like,
right.
she's the queen. So that, I just felt for her. I guess you can talk about that. Like, I was just feeling for Okoye so
Yeah,
badly.
and also you think about Ramonda being told, "I lost your child," like the fear. That's a part of that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of, I'm about to lose something else
Yep.
because you wanted to cheer her up, and now she's in danger. So now I could be dealing with a third tragedy.
Which was very likely,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
that was
yeah.
her, being hysterical or anything. That was a well-founded fear. But yeah, like that scene, like it was, I mean, here's the thing. Like, when I look at the scene, I think two things are true, right? I think absolutely what you said as far as like the trauma response and the trauma dumping, um, coming from Ramonda's side, right? But also the fact that, like, if you watch Black Panther, I mean, Ramonda wasn't lying, right?
Right.
Like, when Killmonger won the challenge and they thought T'Challa had died, the Dora Milaje threw their support, behind Killmonger. And remember,
Yeah.
there was that scene where Okoye um, and Nakia, had bumped into each other, and Nakia was like, "Hey, we got to get out of here," because
Yep.
he was like, Killmonger is going to come after us, and Okoye was like, "I'm not going anywhere," and basically said, "Whoever is on that throne, that's who my loyalty lies to." So I'm sure Ramonda must have felt hurt, because remember, they had to go running to the Jabari for
Yep.
support, and I'm sure, I don't think that was anything. I don't think that was ever, I mean, I don't think it wasn't, it would have been off screen, but I don't think there was any on screen discussion, at least between Okoye and Ramonda. I don't know if they ever sat down and had time to talk about that,
There was no
because then eventually
reconciliation.
what happened, and then the blip happened, and then half of Wakanda disappeared, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Right. There was no reconciliation about what
mm,
that was and what it meant,
mm-hmm.
so that there could be better understanding. And
Right.
that's kind of created a perfect storm for this moment,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
And I think that's a real moment. I think Ryan was just so smart in writing that, is that I think what I liked about Wakanda Forever is that, that now we're presented with this matriarchy, right? Like, with women and like these Black women that are in these positions of power, right? Because you know how we always joke about how, oh, if Black women ran the world, and if Black women ran the world, like there'd be like this utopia, and everything would be great. But I think Ryan was really making us think with that, like even as women, we are flawed, we're human
Yeah,
beings, and I
we're gonna
think,
make mistakes.
yeah, like that, like, to me, that's the real equality, right? Like, there's this thing that's called benevolent sexism, right? Where it's this idea where people think, like, coming from the man's point of view, where men, they kind of see women as equal, but not. So what they do is they either infantilize us or they put us on a pedestal where they're just like, oh, women are better at X, Y, Z. Women are so much better than us than this. They're much better at communication. They're much better at mothering. They're much better. But it really doesn't. It doesn't really. It kind of robs us of our humanity in a way, right?
Yes.
Because what it does is it at least for me speaking as a black woman, I'm sure I would love to hear your point of view. Is I feel like there's a certain pressure as black women to be perfect. It like the like this thing of like protect black women and this and that. Like on one hand it sounds good, but then like when you really think down to it, all of these things are on the condition that black women have to come from a certain script. We have to read from a perfect script, that we can only get that support, we can only get that love if we are absolutely perfect, and there's no space for us to be flawed and human. I would
Yes.
love to hear your.
Yes. And on the flip side of that, for black women who are harmful, how do we call that out without looking like we're not supportive of black women? Because that's the flip side of it. We either have to
Yeah.
be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
or if we're horrifically not,
Mm-hmm.
who is going to be brave enough to say this is a trash black woman? Like, I'm just going to keep it real. Who's going to say that
Right.
without looking a certain way?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a perfect example of that. Like um we're both witnessing this in real time, right?
Right.
Like Kelly Rowland,
Yes.
right? A former member of
Mm-hmm.
Destiny's Child.
Mm-hmm.
What was interesting was like just last week she was on a show being interviewed by Rosenberg, this New York he's with Hot 97 radio station, and it was this really embarrassing on his part where he was basically telling Kelly Rowland like, how does it feel to be number two to Beyonce? How does it
Oh,
feel to, like, just really condescending and gross and very anti-black women. I'll let's
oh
just
yes.
keep it puck. And God bless Kelly Rowland. She was just very graceful in her response. Low key called him dim, and was like, I don't. She was like, my Beyonce shine doesn't diminish my shine. Like we shine together, right? So it's like this very pro black woman message. Fast forward to Sunday night,
Yes.
when
Yes.
she accepted the award for Chris Brown, because I think he won the award for like male best male R&B artist, and then he wasn't there. Kelly went to get the award on his behalf. Well, she read it. She was like, "I'm accepting the award on his behalf." And then I think maybe there were some people in the audience that were booing.
Yeah, I watched it live. So yeah, there were some very strong reactions to
Listen,
him winning. And she was like, calm it down, like
yeah.
yeah.
So there's definitely a feeling of like, damn, Kelly, we were just defending you like 5 days ago. Like, why are you like, going up for this abuser or whatever? At least these are the discussions that's going on. So when you
Mhm.
were talking, like, that's exactly the first thing that popped into my head. Like, there's like, how can we be supportive of Black women? Because we know that Black women, we are judged by a whole
Yes.
different set of standards, right? But at the same time, like you said, if we do something problematic or something, display some trash behavior, how do we call in our own without enacting misogyny, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's the perfect example of, in a one way, um, Beyonce said, Monday I'm overrated, Tuesday on my dick. It's like one day you supported me, and then because I have a mishap,
Mm-hmm.
you throw me under the bus. And like that's the way that black women are treated. We are not given grace at all. Like, I saw that. Like I said, I saw that live. Her doing that. I'm like, that's not gonna be good. Because I already knew the reactions online, and probably like not an hour
Yeah.
after that, it was all like, Kelly did what? I'm like, here we go,
Right.
here we go. But
Right.
like, I couldn't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I put myself in Kelly's shoes. You're
Yes.
accepting an award on somebody's behalf who's not there. And then you receive all these reactions. I don't know how I would react. It may have nothing to do with Chris. It may have been like, whoa, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't, because that was live, we have a live audience, live reactions. We don't know what Kelly's, automatic response could have been.
Right.
and wanted to not be booed at. Like she was booed at, even though we knew what they were doing, but it was directed to her because she made the announcement that Chris won the award.
Oh,
So
okay. I see what you're saying. I see what you're
right.
saying.
So it's
Mhm.
like sometimes we have to pause and think about how would you respond in that moment? Because I don't know how I would feel if a whole bunch of people booed at me and I was just announcing the winner. I don't know how I would respond. I don't. I would hope that I would respond in a way that I could save face, but I just
Right.
don't know. Like sometimes, I guess for me, I always try to put myself in the position of that person, and that's kind of how I saw it with Kelly. I'm not excusing her. I don't really have an opinion either way of her response. So we all
Mhm.
know Chris Brown is trash. Let's like keep it real. But I also realized that these are celebrities. These are also their friends, and that may, I don't, like so it could be the other side too. But I don't care enough to have an opinion either way.
Mm. So bringing it back to Wakanda Forever. So like what
Yes.
you said, I think about again that interaction between Ramonda and Okoye,
Hmm.
like it like from Okoye's point of view, she didn't think she did anything wrong,
No.
right? She was like, I was raised and trained to be a Dora. Like
Yes.
this is what Doras do, right? Like we protect the throne. Whoever, you know, whatever. Like she's coming from her perspective. She was like, I did what I was supposed to do. Whereas Ramonda was like, but I felt betrayed by that, right?
Yes.
Because you had, because I'm pretty sure she was a Dora while T'Chaka was on the throne up
Right.
until his execution and then or his assassination, and then going to T'Challa, and then you know what I mean. Like this is someone I'm sure she had access to the family in a way that most people didn't have, and so for Ramonda, that felt like a personal betrayal,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So they're both coming from their respective perspectives.
They are, and I think that for me with Ramonda, she was like, you had one job, which is to protect my children."
Right.
Like that was basically the energy. Like you had one job,
Mm-hmm.
and look what you done. Like a second time,
Oh, wow.
a second
Wow.
time. You had
Yeah.
one job to protect my children or to be on their side, and you failed again. And now I only got one child left.
So I'm pretty sure, like for Ramonda, like I forget what the term is, but like with people who have PTSD, there like there's
Yes.
like a thing where you're having like flashbacks, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
you actually feel like you're in the moment. So
Yeah.
like for me, I'm trying to be in Ramonda's head that moment.
Yeah.
I'm sure she was kind of flashbacking to like that waterfall scene when Killmonger threw T'Challa, over the thing, and then you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
think all of these things, and then like everything was just hitting her at once, and then losing her husband. Like I'm sure all of these things were hitting her at once, and then
Yeah. That was
it
it.
just yeah.
That was it. Like she was just in her moment. She was in that moment of whatever that she was feeling or remembering. That was the moment. That was her moment.
Right. Right. So let's talk about we'll talk about Nakia, and I think what's interesting about Nakia is that I mean, of course, I wish she had more screen time, but when we watched the movie, we know that she had been away. She wasn't there for the funeral.
Right.
She doesn't come into the movie until Ramonda seeks her out to try to, to rescue Shuri, because we know that, Nakia is like this very experienced war dog, operative. And if anybody could find Shuri, it's going to be Nakia. But then we like with Nakia's story. I wish we had more time to hold that, but I know Ryan. There was a lot of storytelling that Ryan had to tell. But we find out at the end. Again, Nakia had been gone for 5 years, wasn't there at the funeral. I'm sure people were like, "Where's Nakia?" And then we find out that the reason that she had been away is because she actually had a child with T'Challa, and then she and T'Challa had come to the mutual agreement that they did not want their son. His name is Toussaint, and then he's actually his Wakanda name is T'Challa, so he's like T'Challa the second. Um, but they made this decision as the parents that they did not want Toussaint to have this pressure, right? And so that's why she had been away. And I just always think of like I try to think like how difficult that must have been for her to not be there when he died. Number one, number two. Now you're raising this child without the father, like and like where like I think we get an idea of how Nakia worked her grief out because we know that she's somebody who's very empathetic. She's somebody that has a
Right.
lot of empathy and is somebody who isn't like she's not through the lens of just Wakandan loyalty, but she was like, the whole every black person is my person, right?
Right.
And so for her working in Haiti, running the school, I'm guessing maybe that was her way of dealing with the trauma. What did you think?
I just, I think when we saw the end and seeing the son, my heart was like, you know, to have a child who, would not be able to be with his father anymore. I just, so many feelings on that, and to have to still show up again, black women still showing up
Right.
no matter the circumstances, and to be a mom and to not be there, to love a man and to not be there. Like, let's think about this love part here. You love someone and you couldn't be there to pay your own respects. It makes me wonder, does she have any form of trauma of not being able to say her goodbye in her own way?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then how did she explain that to their son?
Right.
You know, I just like with her, it feels so complex. It feels so complex, but also in seeing her be like, I think she's like the headmistress of that school, showing love to the fellow students. Still being able to be that empathetic person, to be that loving, warm person in this way, but also being isolated from a world, that you could get more support of, but you probably needed to be separated from at the same time. Makes me wonder, like, how lonely was she?
Mm.
It
Yeah.
being away from Wakanda, but maybe knowing that she needed to be away.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting because my friend at Jerry Barrow, when we talked about Wakanda Forever, he was like, you know, when you think about it, like Nakia's decision, like her way of like being in Haiti was like that's who she is because even from the first Black Panther, like it seems like to me, if it feels like Nakia definitely has feelings about the monarchy. She
Hmm.
has certain feelings because remember in the first Black Panther, T'Challa was like, I want you to be queen, and
Right,
she was like, if I do choose that, like that wasn't her thing. She was like that, like he was feeling like you sitting on the throne. That's how we're gonna help our
right,
people. But Nakia was like, no, like she's sort of like a missionary of sorts. Like she basically has a passion, right, for
yep,
non-Wakandan blacks. And she was like, because we've been in the shadows and we kind of did nothing, right? Like we didn't intercede or, to help our other black brothers and sisters. She was like, this is my ministry. That's the word I want to look for. Like that is Nakia's ministry. Nakia's
yes,
ministry is to like create like this Pan African bridge between the Wakandans and Brazilian black people and American black people and European black people. Like for her, like that's the family. Like for her, Wakanda is not just limited to that land; it's everywhere. And so it was very interesting to kind of see like for her son, I don't think she wants that. Like she was like, I don't want him to have that pressure of like being the next King T'Challa or whatever. I think she wants him. And what's interesting is that he, at least for me, is that, and this is my opinion, is that I feel like T'Challa Jr. or T'Challa the second, if he does decide that he wants to claim the throne when he's an adult, he's going to be a very different kind
oh
of
yeah,
king of Wakanda because he's not raised in while his parents he's a full-blooded Wakandan. He's going to see the world.
yes,
Like he's growing up in Haiti, and I'm sure Nikia will probably take him to other parts of the world. So I feel like with that kind of education coming back at Wakanda, I think what it is he's going to be probably one of the greatest leaders that they've ever had because he's bringing in a whole different. T'Challa had started to do that,
right,
before he passed away, but I think T'Challa the second, especially with Nakia being his mother, I feel like he's going to bring a whole different perspective, at least for the generation of Wakandans that are going to grow up under him. It's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think that kind of going back to Nakia,
Mm-hmm.
I think she represented women who don't want to give up what they love
Mm.
or what their significant other wants them to do.
Yes.
I think that's for me what she represents. She represents someone who's independent minded and who knows her mission, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And I may love you, but I'm not giving this up for you.
Mm.
And you have to love me enough to know why this matters and to let me be my full self.
That's yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and so I think that, in raising their son, he gets to see his mother be her full self and not just be number two as a queen,
Yeah.
and that's going to shape his viewpoint as well as
Yeah.
to the power of women. And of course, and also in what you were saying, in being worldly and seeing conditions that, his father may have been shielded from. You're royalty. You're not going to see destitute situations. You're not going to see suffering. You're not going to see people being hurt. And
Yeah.
most likely, with Nikia's, in some way, missionary viewpoint of, truly embodying, I'm rooting for everybody Black, he's going to know the realities of Black people across the diaspora in different parts of the world that his
Yeah.
father didn't know. So I think that's, to the point you're making, is going to be something that he will bring into this role if he decides to be the Black Panther.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one more point. So speaking of death, I mean, we do know that halfway through the movie, Ramonda it dies.
I was not ready. I was not ready.
How'd you feel about that? I was like, oh, Ryan.
Oh man, first it hurt.
Mhm.
It hurt. I was like, what? Huh? That was I was like, man. I like Ryan. You really did this to us, man. I thought we was cool. I thought we was cool. We already dealing with one heartache. You gonna give us two?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that when I had time to sit with it, Ramonda, she just represented what mothers do. She couldn't save her own child. She
Yeah.
saved
She
somebody else.
died saving
Yeah,
Riri.
right. She couldn't save her own child, but she started saving someone else's.
Hmm.
A Black American girl at that.
Thank you. I was
Like,
thinking. I was thinking.
like, who is going to give up their life for a Black American girl? Not many,
Yeah.
but a mother who has lost a child, may.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's significance. I love that you're saying that because I think there's a specific significance to that because, like,
yeah,
even from the first Black Panther, I mean, like we can be honest, right? Like you said, like, Black women, as like, we're flawed, we're not all perfect. Like Ramonda definitely had some feeling about non-Wakandan Black people,
oh yeah,
right?
oh
Um,
yeah.
and that's coming from the Wakandan society. They're kind of like outsider,
They're
and
uppity. They're uppity. They're uppity.
yeah, and so it was like there was definitely, but I feel like the by giving her life up
Mhm.
to save, like you said, a Black American woman. Like it felt like she had come full circle.
Yeah,
Like she finally got it. I mean,
yeah,
it came at the expense of her, but I feel like there was something very poetic in that, in the fact that she's not of royal blood, she's not Wakandan, she's not my daughter, but she saw Riri's worth,
yeah,
right? Like this is like she saw like that could be my daughter because
yeah,
much like Shuri, Riri is like this brilliant scientist or whatever. So I felt like she was starting. I think uh, Ramonda was finally beginning to understand what Nakia is fighting for. She was beginning to understand, and I think just even coming to Haiti
yeah.
to go meet to meet Nakia. I mean, we didn't see it on screen, but I'm sure Nakia probably gave her a tour, like
Hmm.
because we know that Haiti is one of the poorest countries,
Right.
and that's not by accident,
No,
right?
it's not. It's by design.
Yeah, like Haiti led the first successful slave revolt.
Yes.
They were oppressed by the French, and they revolted with nothing but like conch shells and machetes. They
Right.
didn't have guns, you know what I mean? And they kicked the French out, but then the French were like, oh, but okay, you want your freedom? Well, you have to pay us. So I think Haiti was paying, I think when you adjust it, it's like something $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's why Haiti is not, it's not that we're a poor country or we're stupid, we're dumb. No, it's
Mm-mm.
like the oppressor had the boot on our neck. Like we're still paying for our freedom, which is so effed up. But I think that there's something really interesting about the fact that out of all the countries that Ryan could have picked, I love that he picked
Yeah,
Haiti
I did
because
too.
there's so much symbolism in there because
And
it's
it's
like,
perfect for someone like Nakia. Like, of
yes,
course, Haiti would be somewhere that she would go
yes, I agree
if she
with that.
wasn't in Wakanda.
I agree with that. And then I think for um Ramonda, I'm sure she probably was showing her the school and the children. I think Ramonda was beginning to understand
Right.
like where Wakanda should stand in, when we're talking about geopolitics, like where does Wakanda fit? It for them, it was just a matter of like we just need to protect the vibranium. We need to protect the vibranium. We're the most powerful country in the world, but like okay, so you're like the most powerful, but but people who look like you are suffering, right? Which was
Yes.
what Killmonger said, which was true. But yeah, I think the fact that she gave her life to save Riri, that was thing. But and this is what I want to ask you when we talk about not having closure, right?
Mm.
The same way that uh, Nakia didn't get to say goodbye to T'Challa, at least not physically, like she wasn't there
Right.
to die. This I like it killed me not only seeing Ramonda die on screen, but then when Okoye saw her and was trying to, and did like CPR and everything and
Right.
tried to bring her back to life, and she called her mother,
Yes.
that broke me. I was just like, you know what I mean? And just knowing that the last exchange that Okoye and Ramonda had was that.
And that's another failure. She couldn't bring her back.
Yeah,
That's the third failure. She could not save her.
yeah. That's a tough one because I'm sure she was like, I wish I could, because I'm sure at some point I think Ramonda would have apologized to her. I think
Yeah.
Ramonda would see, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
There would have
But
been some reconciliation at some point.
yeah, yeah, but then you don't have that, and that's another tenet of grief when you lose the loved one. Is like you sometimes you don't get the Hollywood goodbyes where
No.
everybody's at their bedside. Sometimes it's as simple as the person just goes to work and just doesn't come back.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what do you do with that, that gap,
Yeah, yeah,
in that connection? Because there's a gap there now, and I just, there's just so many things when it comes to grief, death, and dying, loss that Ryan and them just personified in a way that you don't see, particularly when it comes to Black people. You don't
right.
see these complexities handled in a way that has care and nuance, you know, that feels so real, you know, so I just really love how he did that. But going to Ramonda, I just feel like she just did what a mother does. Like I just really saw that act of her saving Riri as what a mother does. Whether it's your child or somebody else's child. If you see somebody, young child like that, 'cause, like Riri is a young adult. You see someone's child in danger, you act on it. And I just think that if she was to die, she died a hero.
But
Mhm.
just this idea, I think that people have this expectation of Wakanda or the Black Panther franchise. It's supposed to represent this Black or African utopia, right? But at least for me, the way that I interpreted Wakanda Forever, and again, with Ryan Coogler and Joe Edgar Cole and the cast coming in with all this grief, I look at Wakanda Forever as a more of a it's more of a dystopic tale, right? It's more like a cautionary tale of like this is what happens, right? Because I think yes, with the first Black Panther, there was sort of like this utopian feeling, with Chadwick and everything. And now with Chadwick gone, right? Like it's sort of like the utopia shattered. And so I feel like that's kind of reflected in the movie. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it shows that life isn't perfect. No matter how hard you try to keep things contained, something always unexpected is going to happen.
Right.
And if you try to keep everything under wraps, keep things orderly, whatever this disruption is going to be so profound.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we see there. And also the folks' view of utopia, like that's not realistic. Like
All right.
this is not realistic. Like if you're a human, unless you are a god, if you are a human, you are going to suffer. I don't care if you live in the perfect country. Your suffering is going to find you. That's
Yeah.
part of the human experience. I know that's not something we want to think about, but suffering is a
Mm-hmm.
part of being human.
Right.
And Wakanda is not immune to that or from that. And we have
Mm.
seen the shattering of Wakanda's innocence and the
Mm.
protective nature of it with these deaths, with the invasion of Namor and his people. We've seen this utopia be upended
Right.
and now having to be restructured,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out who are we
Right.
in this world of people trying to invade us, whether it's the colonizers wanting our vibranium to us setting off this now arch enemy that we have. How
Mm-hmm.
do we show up in this way? Because I think that I know it wasn't a morning scene, but just seeing the destruction of Wakanda,
Mm-hmm.
was very hard. To see this,
Wow.
to see the land, the flooding and the land and everything like that. It was like, oh my gosh,
Mm.
and them just being,
People were saying that there were kind of like it was sort of like a parallel to Katrina. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, like I can definitely see you thinking about that like in that way. Yeah,
Mhm.
I can see that. I can see that. It just, I don't know. I think that we also, as a people, as Black folks, I know we have this desire for a utopia because of who we are,
Yes.
and I understand we want a place where we can be safe,
Hmm.
where we are valued. So I get the urge to uphold Wakanda in such a light,
Hmm.
as a people, because we have never felt a Wakanda. We never felt this perfect nation of Black people, you
Mm.
know, being powerful and having their own and not having to deal with the white gaze or having to deal with colonizers or being colonized and anything like that. Like I understand that too, but when you are surrounded by all of these ills of the world, a place like Wakanda is going to be impacted in some way, shape, or form. Eventually,
Yeah.
it's not going to be immune forever.
I definitely want to just expanding on these themes of grief and trauma. There is a horror thriller by the title of Smile. It was released in theaters back in September. It's actually one of the highest grossing horror movies of 2022. It's written and directed by Parker Finn. And basically, the we have this psychologist named Rose. She works at a hospital, and she has an interaction with a patient where the patient basically commits suicide in front of her. But before that, something very supernatural happens. So we understand that this death or this suicide or what we think is a suicide, there's some supernatural aspects of it. So she witnesses this patient kill herself in front of her, and then now whatever the spirit or whatever is now haunting her. And the way that it appears is in a smile, where it'll just kind of settle on somebody's face, and it's almost like, but the smile is like so menacing.
Hmm.
It looks like a
Yes.
grimace almost.
Yes.
And I didn't get to see it in theaters. It's now on Paramount Plus. If you have a subscription, you can watch it. And I was just really um, impressed or blown away with how, because a lot of horror movies deal with trauma. That, you know
Right.
what I mean? Like that.
Right.
That's one of the underlying themes. But I think the way that they approached it in this movie, it was something that I felt very connected to it. I felt very connected to it in a way. Just even the idea, like how you can make something as sweet and innocent as a smile so freaking scary to me. I was like,
What?
OMG, are you kidding me? And then
Man.
to see like Rose, start out as like this very caring and empathetic psychologist, and then she just starts spiraling,
Yes.
because now this thing is after her, and as the audience, you're not sure if it's in her mind, like is this really like a supernatural presence, like a malevolent presence, or is this in her mind? We're not really sure until we get to the end of the movie. So I was like, I have to speak to Vilissa about this movie, because I do feel like that movie and Wakanda Forever, as far as like how they handle grief, is that I'm very interested in how they both handle that. So what did you think of Smile, and how did you feel that the filmmaker, what do you feel that he was saying about grief and trauma in this movie?
Oh man. Before we started recording, I was like, what Rebecca got me watching here? I'm like, oh my gosh. That's probably like I was like, I'm not gonna lie to you. That's probably like one of the scarier things I have seen in a while.
Yeah.
So it's very good to hear that it was high grossing because it
Mm-hmm.
earned its dollars. Like I was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. Like there's some really good scary stuff here. And yeah, like when they started doing that, I'm like, oh shit, here we
Right.
go. I'm like, here we go. Here's somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
captivated by this spirit that's going around. Um, I really like the complexity of this grief that Rose has,
Mm-hmm.
kind of in a twofold, because we're dealing with childhood trauma of watching her mother die and then she not do anything to save her because
Right.
her mother, for what we could glean, was a monster to her.
Mm-hmm.
And and then what does that do when you have unresolved childhood trauma of that significance?
Right.
You
Because I
know,
think she witnessed her mother kill herself, right? Like her mother
yes,
was
yes.
there you
It looked
go.
like she may have been under some substance or something that was going on with her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And and then you have that, being I think she was like what, like a child, like a teen, and like a 10 or something like that. So being very young, witnessing that, not knowing what to do, and then that continues on as an adult. And the interesting thing is her being a psychologist and
Mm-hmm.
still holding that trauma in some way, shape, or form. And you would think someone of her educational background would be in a better situation of the complicated nature of that grief, and to see that grief consume her in that way through these supernatural elements was just kind of wild to see,
Mm-hmm.
and it reminds me, being a social worker, how so many folks come into a lot of these fields wanting to help people
Mm-hmm.
because we know what kind of help we wish we had. But sometimes the helper needs to help too,
Right.
and I know that Rose was in therapy, but it's like how much of that therapy was connected to her childhood grief of watching her mother die.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of brings me back to that, of that storyline, just to see her making these connections about everyone else who was captivated by this supernatural spirit, from her clients to other folks that she realized, have also dealt with this, to how it just really affected all of her relationships. Like she
Right.
lost her current partner, her job was like, no, you can't work here no more, with your current condition. She just felt like no one saw what she did, this evilness.
Yeah.
No, I was like, wow, I really was just really captivated by all the layers of what we were witnessing for almost 2 hours. And then
Mm-hmm.
of course the ending, it was like, wow, okay. you know, um, it was just a lot, but in a way that you don't really get with horror,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to grief like that. So I really like that they connected grief in this way. Like what happens when you have unresolved grief, and how does it manifest over time and come up in this very different way. I think
Right.
that was kind of the takeaway from me, is like why it's so important for people to be intentional about how they grieve and how they handle their grief,
Mm-hmm.
and also paying attention to, since Rose experienced this as a child, children with grief, because we don't pay attention to children with grief.
Yes.
How does that impact them as they go through their development of childhood, adolescence, and then adulthood?
Right. Right. Because I mean that's the thing is like, and that's something that I'm learning being in therapy myself is like, and I don't think that it's like some new agey thing to say that like what we experience as children, right? Like how we're
Mhm.
loved by our parents, like that shapes our relationship attachment styles
Yes.
as adults. And that's something that I'm still trying to work through. It's like, well, I don't think that I certainly wasn't didn't I don't feel that I came from an abusive family, but
Yes.
I do feel that because of the gender roles that were assigned, like my mother was a stay at home mom, and my dad was like, the breadwinner. You know what I mean? So he was
Right.
like the head of the family, like a very traditional West Indian type home. You know what I mean? And so I feel like the way as an adult, what I've realized, like in my relationships with men or whatever, it's not, I won't say that I have daddy issues, but because my father was someone who was emotionally distant, like he's not someone who actually, would hug you or be like, I love you. Or like my dad was not like that. Like he was very like, I pay the bills, I take you to church. My father has literally said this. He was like, my job is to make sure you don't go to hell. You know what I mean? Because my
Right.
dad is a pastor. Like that is his number one goal. So that means if you had to go to church 4, 5, 6 days a week, that's what you're doing, you know. But I never really had like an emotional relationship with my dad. And then also the fact that I was the oldest,
Right.
right? So then I was helping raise my younger siblings. And one of the things that I've learned in therapy is that I'm very hyper independent. And it was explained to me that usually people who are just like, I can do everything myself, I can do that, to this point of hyper independence, that's usually coming from childhood, where
Yeah.
you felt like your needs weren't being met, or you felt like you weren't being heard or you weren't being seen, and so you're like, well, I'll just do it myself,
Right.
you know. And so that manifests into your thing. So that definitely like how your parents, the amount of affection that they show, whether they use corporal punishment or not, like all of these things shape us
It
as
does.
adults. Yeah. Yeah.
It does. And I think that sometimes we realize, even if we haven't had extreme things happen to us, like with Rose, in the movie, we are
Mm-hmm.
still getting messages about who we are, expectations of
Yeah.
gender roles, expectation of us, based on the birth order, that we, are in. You were being the oldest, of your siblings. In the movie, Rose was the youngest, and
Mm.
being alone, having to deal with whatever wrath her mother put her through. You
Right.
know, Although things impact the way that we view ourselves and our connections to ourselves and each other and in relationships. And, even if you have the best childhood, there's still some things you probably still have to unlearn. You know,
Yes.
there's still some things that you still have to make
Right.
sense of, and also coming to the reality that your parents are human and they
Mm.
are doing the best that they can. I think we touched on this a little bit in the Lovecraft Country episode of they're
Mm-hmm.
doing the best that they can, but that still does not excuse some of the things that happen to you. you
Right.
know, um, I know that with myself, I was
Mm-hmm.
raised by my grandmother who, for me, was just perfect. And my mother has her own discretions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it in that way when it
Right.
comes to her mental health and how she engages with everybody. And so I
Mm.
kind of had that duality of having someone who was emotionally available, present, and stable
Mhm.
versus someone who was unpredictable, and having to navigate that and becoming older and better understanding my mother and who she is in connection to her mental health, to just learning little things about her childhood, like being a child of the 60s and 70s, having a mental illness that probably nobody suspected. And being black and, living in rural South Carolina, having
Mm.
that empathy of that type of upbringing,
Yeah.
but also not excusing behavior and
Mm-hmm.
also not, you know, living with those complexities and holding in it on my own, in
Right.
some ways that I think some of my family members do. And it really wasn't until for me, I got to grad school and started to learning more certain things that I started to release some of those things that as a family unit, we all kind of held because of my mother and releasing some of those things about her actions and behaviors. So it takes a lot of work when you're dealing with complex family dynamics of
Mm-hmm.
unlearning, relearning, adjusting, and then coming anew as a person through all those stories and narratives that were thrusted upon you.
Yeah.
And you're finally realizing what is your narrative outside of those messages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important to try to capture um, when we think about, who we are, how we became.
Right. Right. Like I remember there's a saying um, that someone said. I forget who said it, but I hear it a lot where they're like, the hurt is not your fault, right? Like what
Yes.
happened isn't your fault, but the healing is absolutely your responsibility.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's something that I've been wrestling with, because I left a very traumatic relationship earlier this year, and there's as much as I've been like working on the healing, there's also a part of me that's just so angry,
Mhm.
like just like resentful that I'm the one that has to do the work. Because
Right.
really, whatever my partner did, that you know what I'm saying, like that's on him. Then he takes, I hold him accountable for that. But he, in my head, I'm like, oh, he just gets to go on and do
Mhm.
whatever he wants. Like there's no accountability or whatever, and yet like I'm the one that has to hold the pieces, like I'm the one that has to do the work and the therapy and the meditation, and I'm like it's like no, I don't have to, but it's like, but at the same time I realize like, and I'm definitely not saying that when bad things happen to you, like, oh, it's a lesson and that it was meant to be. I don't subscribe to anything. I just, like you said, life is just full of suffering. Like things just happen to you. It is what it
Right.
is. But just realizing that there's this meditation that I do for healing where they said that the through that pain and that grief, you are given an opportunity to reset, right? And
Mhm.
that you can reimagine and rebuild your life the way that you want. And realizing like that is actually a gift, right?
It is.
That it's an actual gift that you get, that healing space. It feels really uncomfortable. Like
Yes.
you just don't like it. Like I saw this. I actually sent this to my friend. I just wanted to read it real quick. It was from Alice Walker.
Mhm.
Um, and it was something where she said, some periods of growth are so confusing that we don't even recognize we are growing. We may feel hostile or angry or weepy and hysterical, or we may feel depressed. It would never occur to us unless we stumbled on a book or a person who explained to us that we are, in fact, in the process of change, of actually growing more than we have before. And I was like, okay, Alice, I see it like in the healing, it feels so messy.
Yes.
It's not like, it's absolutely not like the Hollywood movies where you get this montage of them going through a field or like going shopping and redoing their hair. No, it's messy and it's uncomfortable and it sucks.
It
you
does.
know, yeah, that's the thing, and it's like the question is like, are you going to choose to participate in it or not? And I think with Smile, that is one of the things that they talk about, like when you decide not to engage in that healing and messiness, like these are some of the things that can manifest. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. And I think that, it kind of, bringing it back to Wakanda Forever, we see this
Mhm.
with Shuri with deciding what way she's going to go. Is she going to go be like a Killmonger Jr. in a way? Or is
Mhm.
she going to do, what she knows she should do, like her brother would?
Mm.
So we see that how grief can shape the way that we engage when we are wronged or in a very hard moment of trying to figure out what is the best solution to fix something. Um, I think that's something that I always thought about with Shuri's character, like the way
Mm-hmm.
that she started to go the route and the way that her grief and pain led her, and then the route she eventually took at the end, which was the route that we knew that she would get to eventually. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that shows us with the way that pain and grief can, you know, take the wheel in the way that we figure out how do we heal
Mm-hmm.
and if we choose to. Because
Yeah.
healing is hard. It's difficult. It's challenging. And the thing is, you're never going to be done. That's what
Mm.
makes it so messy. You're
Mm.
never going to be done. Because there's always going to be a situation or a person or a
Mm.
circumstance that's going to scratch that trauma.
Right.
And you're going to be, in some ways, emotionally put back a little bit in that moment. And you are going to have to decide what you do.
Yeah.
And it's easier to stuff it down and ignore it versus always meeting it head on
Mm-hmm.
each time something comes up to where it needs to be addressed, whether big or small. And that's
Mm.
what makes healing such a constant. People think, oh, I'm healed, I'm good. Like, no, you are always going to be healing. Just like with grief, you're always going to be grieving. It's just an evolution of your grief. It's just an evolution of the pain. And whether or not you have better control of it instead of it controlling you.
The reason why I say this is that one of the themes in Smile is how the trauma is almost like infectious, right?
Yeah.
Like like the way that Rose witnessed this patient kill herself, and we find out that really it's not them really committing suicide. It's the spirit that takes them over and does that to them,
Yeah.
right? If they give into it, let me say that. And so what it does is it becomes infectious. So you witness this person dying with the spirit, and then the spirit chases you, and then unless you kill somebody else, then that spirit is going to kill you. And it was really like that is how it can be. Like, you can trigger people.
Yes.
Like, your trauma can trigger other people.
So people can unintentionally trigger us with their own trauma or drama or both. Of course, not intentionally and
Mm-hmm.
definitely not maliciously, but it is on us to be aware of how much of someone's life do we want to get involved in and what does that look like for us when we have a very fresh trauma to go through. Was you recognizing that? And that's a part of the healing journey, like knowing how much you can handle. Like, I know for me, December would be 7 years since my grandmother died.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's certain grief things I cannot handle. At the time, I
Mm-hmm.
know there's this show called, no, I think it's a show called From Scratch that's on Netflix. Like,
Yes.
yeah, I was like, nope. I was like,
Bring
mm-mm,
the show
can't watch
up.
that. Mm-mm. Nope,
Yes.
nope, 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 nope. And I know it's good because people talk about it, but I'm like, mm-mm. I was like, they got people crying about it. I'm like, nope, that
Mm-hmm.
is too much for me to deal with. So you got to know your limitations. Even though it's 7 years for me since her death, I know my limitations as to like how much grief storylines I can take in TV shows and movies. And even with Wakanda Forever, I was a little. I went because I wanted to support, but I was a little hesitant. I was like, I hope this ain't too bad. I'm
Yeah.
like, hope it's not too bad. But luckily, it wasn't. But it's just that self awareness, of how much can I hold with this very sensitive topic,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it's incredibly raw or it may have its moments to where I may be more emotional than others, it's
Right.
still my responsibility to know
Mm-hmm.
how much I can hold and not to do more than that. Because that will compromise me and be unfair to what I am working towards in my healing and understanding.
Right.
So we all have to do that type of self inventory
Mm-hmm.
about what what do we have the realistic capacity to hold and what do we need to realistically back away from
Yeah.
and stay
Yeah.
true to that.
Yeah, it's because it's sort of like not the word bookmarks, but there's benchmarks,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
you, like grandmother's death. that you're like, all right, around that time, like, okay, I know I'm going to be feeling a certain way, you
Yes.
know? And then, yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like, having that self awareness of like what your weaknesses, well, I won't say weaknesses, but like what your triggers are, like where you're tender. That's the word I'll
Yes.
use,
Yes.
tender.
The
Like,
tender.
you kind of hurt, it's like, oh, don't touch that. That's a little, and it's okay. You know, what was interesting was like, I saw some people on, who went to see Wakanda Forever, and they were like, "Well, I saw the movie and I didn't cry. I don't like." They were kind of like, "I don't even understand like why you people were crying," and that's fine. I mean, if it didn't hit you that way, that's fine. That doesn't make you less emotional. It doesn't make you a
No.
monster or anything. But like when you start bragging about it like a personality trait, like that's not the movie. Like I said, everybody, like whatever movie it is, whether it's Smile or Wakanda Forever or From Scratch or whatever, there's always movies, depending on where you are in your life or the things that you've experienced in your life, you're gonna come at it at a certain way. You're coming at
Yes.
it with those traumas and the grief and the triggers or whatever. So just because you, if somebody felt emotional watching a movie, let them have that. Let them
Exactly.
have that space. Like, I don't know why they were crying. Well, you don't know what their life is. Like, you could have somebody sitting next to you crying, and you're like, I don't even, like, this movie's a comedy. Why are you crying? You don't know. You don't know. It may be that the actor looks a certain way, might remind them or something, or it might be the locale that it's shot in. You just never know what
Exactly.
will set you off. And yeah, like you want. And so going back to Smile, it was like with Rose, like the idea that I got from her was sort of like she went into psychiatry to as a way to help other people, right? Like I saw how mental illness affected my mother, and so I want to help people too. But I'm wondering if, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is maybe also going into psychiatry was a way of, it kind of formed as armor for her too, because you're like, if I can figure out, like, sort of like, if I can figure out why this happens to this person mentally, like what is the cause, then maybe, because we know that mental illness can be hereditary too, maybe in a
Right.
way it was a preventative measure for Rose as well, right? Like if I'm in the field of psychiatry, like maybe it's a way of her self monitoring herself. What do you think?
I think that I think for me, Rose kind of did the thing to where they want to be. I think Rose wants to in some way be a savior. So she couldn't save her mom. Let me try to be a savior in another way. Um, really, um, really do that. They try to cover up their pain by helping other people, and that's not how you do your healing.
Right.
That's not how you can't you know you can't stuff down your pain and try to help someone else. You
Mhm,
have to do what you can to take care of home. Healing starts at home.
mhm,
And I think that Rose um had good intentions on being in her field. So you could tell when we saw the beginning how she really had a lot of empathy for her clients. But I think sometimes we can get so focused on helping other people
mhm,
that we don't always help ourselves.
mhm.
And I see this like with some colleagues, they come to the field, particularly like black and brown folks, come to like social work or anything like that. You're like, I know what it's like to not have support. I was, in foster care, or, I dealt with, some other economic and, societal struggle. And I want to make sure that it doesn't have happen to somebody else. And that is
Yeah.
genuine, and that is loving. But do we assess as to if that thing didn't happen to us, would we want to pursue that? If we had a different life trajectory, would that be our passion?
Mm.
And for some people, it may not be. And and I think that with Rose, and I'm kind of looking at it through my more so professional lens than through as a viewer. I just really saw her as being a testament as to people go into these fields with great intentions, but they still have this heaviness that doesn't leave them. And it will always come up eventually. Whether you have a client that may trigger you because of their story or their behaviors, or you see circumstances that's out of your control that no matter what you do, it won't get better, or you get that savior complex of, I got to save everybody. And it's like, no, you're not there to save people. You're there to assist them on their journey. And you have to have the consciousness to know your um, position in their life,
Right.
because you are playing a small role in somebody's life. And you are, if you're a therapist or a case manager, whatever, your role is to help them along their journey. You're not going to be there forever. So don't make yourself a fixture in that person's life. Make yourself, a help in that person's life. Make yourself an aid in that person's life. Because it's about what they do with your support, not you directing them as to how they need to live their life and according to what you want them to do.
Right.
So
Because
I
I
think,
think in the at one part in the movie, we understand that she's kind of overworked. At one
yeah,
point, her boss is like, listen, you're working like 60, 70 hours
yeah,
a week. That's like 60, like, that's not like just an office job where you're sitting in front of a
no,
computer. Like, you're dealing people with like mental health and challenges and illnesses. And it's like, she was already, I felt like at the time that we met her at the movie, it was like, she was already overwhelmed and
yeah,
had it was probably way past her threshold. And so by the time that this supernatural spirit enters her life, I think that's why he was attracted to her, because he was like, because clearly this spirit, that's what it feeds off of. It feeds off of trauma, because we realize that a lot of these victims all have something in common, is that they had a loved one die or they experienced some sort of trauma. So it's not random at all. So for Rose, it was like a buffet, right? Because not only, now that I think about it, the reason why I think it especially was attracted to Rose was not only because she had experienced childhood trauma herself, she was kind of like taking in all the trauma for other patients.
yeah,
So he was especially feeding off of that, you
yes.
know? Yeah.
And she just represents somebody who, if you're working 67 hours a week doing that type of work, you're going to burn out. And she has already up to that point overextended herself and
Yeah.
dealing with this, supernatural force. It
Mm-hmm.
just broke,
Mm-hmm.
the dam, of what she was holding. And so I think that's a lesson too. Is like, how much do we give to these careers that can be so consuming based on what they involve you doing, that sometimes you don't know that you're taking everything on.
Yeah. So then there's definitely like sort of a conversation in this movie about capitalism,
Yeah,
right? And how like this idea of like working, 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 and it's like, and our mental health is just not addressed, right?
yeah,
Because it's almost like this catch-22, right? Because for the most part, if you want quality healthcare, you have to work, which
yes,
I just think in this country is crazy, because you look at most other countries, you just get healthcare off the bat.
right.
But in America, you have to have a job, you have to work a certain amount of hours, make a certain income for you to have access to healthcare. Okay, you have the healthcare. But then when you need to make a doctor's appointment or a therapist appointment, this very job is like, oh, you don't have time. You
Exactly.
didn't have time. Oh, well, I need to make an appointment with my therapist. What? Oh, because I remember at my last corporate job, if you wanted a day off, you had to ask for it like 2 weeks in advance. Well,
Yep.
what if I have a mental crisis
Yep.
at the last minute and I need my therapist, right? Oh, I have to wait 2 weeks to see my therapist?
No.
Is that what you're telling me? Or just like even a physical illness? It's crazy.
It's just a setup. It's a setup to for people to not take care of themselves in the
Mm-hmm.
ways they should be doing and can be doing if they have the actual access to. And it just speaks to the devaluing of quality of life and not doing enough to make sure that people have the basics. Healthcare is a basic need.
Yeah.
And when people aren't able to do that, and be able to take care of themselves, everything else falls apart. Everything else falls apart. And I think this movie kind of does that. When you don't take care of yourself, everything eventually falls apart.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump to the ending of the movie, because that was just like, already I knew there was not going to be a happy ending.
Yeah.
And just a PS, I love horror movies that don't have that have a tragic ending. I don't really like horror movies that have happy endings. Like, it's not a horror movie, no. So basically, when Rose is on the run from the spirit, and then she decides the best way that she can protect herself and the people around her is to just isolate herself, which is interesting. Because I want to hear your thoughts on that. So she isolates herself. She goes to like this old house. I think it's the house, her childhood home.
Right.
It's pretty run down, and then she goes there and has, there's not even electricity in the house, so she's using like a gas lamp. And then that's when the spirit finds her. So finally she has like this sort of memory of her mother. It's like her mother manifests. Clearly we know it's the spirit or whatever. And then it turns into this thing. So we see the true shape of what this spirit is that's chasing her. And yeah, so there's this one specific scene where she thinks that she's escaped this. She thinks that she's escaped the spirit, but actually it's all in her mind, right? Like, because
Right.
throughout the movie she's just having like these whole, I don't even call them daydreams, but like these images or things or events that she thought has happened, but they actually aren't. It's just the spirit that's messing with her. And so she's there, and so you see the spirit in this. It sort of like looks like her mother, but much taller and just much uglier. Um,
Yes.
and then she basically is like, "Well, I'm gonna face it down." And so you're like, "Yeah, okay." This is her moment. She's finally facing her demons, so to
Right.
speak. And then it literally rips its face off, right? And then that's when we see what it looks like. It's just like this horrific demonic thing, and then it opens its mouth, and so it's like a mouth in 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 a mouth, right? Just
Yes.
all grinning. And then it just grabs a hold of her, and then it just kind of just goes into her body, just through her mouth. And let me tell you something, Melissa, like that image right there, I was like, I think for people who are going through, like, through what I've been going through, is like I try to explain to my friends like how it feels.
Right.
But even then, I feel like I don't even as a writer, I don't even feel like I have the words to explain like how it feels to be in my head sometimes, right? And that image just crystallized it for me. Like that's exactly what it feels like. Where if you would think of that demon or that entity as like all the grief and trauma, where it is just cramming itself down your throat,
Yes.
and like you feel like you're choking on it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what it feels like. But yeah, like I wanted to get your thoughts, like just going back to her decision to isolate herself. Like, because I feel like that's what people who are depressed or whatever, like they usually try to separate themselves. Because throughout the movie we start to see her, she separates herself from her older sister. She breaks up with her boyfriend. She breaks up with her therapist. Like, it's just like there's these levels where she's just slowly isolating herself.
Right. And I think she isolates herself because she feels like she has no control.
Mm.
Like with the scene of the birthday party where everyone thought that she's the one who, gave her nephew the dead cat. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
"No, I didn't do that. I didn't do that." Or when she tried to talk to her sister, and I think she just felt so misunderstood, and nobody could see what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that she felt that isolating was the way to get away from everything and to not hurt other people. Because she had this, I guess, one of her, like you said, not daydream, but just like this vivid dream of her killing one of her patients. To kind
Mm-hmm.
of release the demon, release the spirit from her and have it onto him. Like she understood that if she didn't isolate, she could do some irreparable harm, in some way, shape, or form. So I saw the isolation as a way of protecting her from carrying out the wishes of the spirit,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
But to the point that you were also making, and seeing the spirit go into her, like when it's in like in its true form, go into her, that just reminded me of grief, like being consumed, literally
Yeah.
consumed by grief, and the pain of that, and not knowing, how to escape it once it has a hold of you. I think that what for me that particular scene represented, like it made me think about like the first year of my grandmother dying, and just the way that I think like the first maybe 3 months, especially just how consumed I was with the grief, with the pain, just never ending. Just, I'm someone who's had surgeries due to my disability, and nothing compared to that level of pain. You
Wow.
know,
I'm so glad you
nothing,
said that. I'm so glad you
nothing compared to that. I've had surgeries on my back, on my legs. I've had broken bones. No pain I have endured measures up to the grief pain.
Yeah.
And so that scene just was like a representation of that for me, like just the overarching being consumed by this force, by these feelings, and and it taking over. Like that's real. That
Yeah.
is so real. And I don't think we talk about that enough or get a great depiction of that like we did in Smile.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's this idea that like, because I think the thing in American culture, like we're still trying to get to the place that we understand that like mental and emotional pain is just as valid as physical pain,
Yes.
right? Like it's all in your head, right? Everybody says that. Oh, it's all in your head. Oh, just shake it off, or you're just feeling the blues or whatever. And it's funny that you said that, and I so related to what you just said because it was like, like in the past 2 years, I've had three surgeries. My first surgery, I had my fibroids removed. The second one, I had to get it was a hernia from the result of the first surgery that they had to fix. So I had that, and
Right.
then last year I had the cancer scare where they found precancerous cells, and so I had to have a lumpectomy. Girl, listen, all three of them, you could my friends and my partner at the time will all tell you that I was freaking out. Like my first surgery, I had never ever had a surgery before, and I was
Right.
like, I'm gonna die on the surgery table. I'm not gonna wake up. Like all of these things but I got through it, right? And it was
Right.
just like, okay, okay. But it's like emotional pain is a way. Like I can deal with physical pain in some ways.
Yeah.
Like I know, like okay, you take a heating pad, or here's this
Yes.
medication, or here's that. But like emotional and mental pain, like I and still trying to figure out how to deal with that
No, it's
because it
never
just
ending. Like with the physical pain, at least there would be either some healing or you can, you know, do things to ease the pain if it's not going away physically. But the emotional, mental pain is always there, and it's always going to be there. It's always going to linger
right.
with something. And again, it may take something to trigger it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
always lurking in the background in a
Yes.
way, and you're not going to be able to escape it. It's inescapable.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And
truly
for
inescapable.
me, like for me, I'm not saying one is worse than the other. I'm saying
No,
both of them are equally
yes,
painful. Yeah.
right, right, but they function differently in how they manifest into
Mm-hmm.
you when they first happen, and then over time.
Yeah.
Over time, like I said, with some physical pain, it may get better, it may be stationary, it may be worse, but there may it's our society, they know what to do with physical pain. They
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what to do with the hidden pain of like mental and emotional. So it's easier, quote unquote, to treat one versus the other and not understand the significance of when we don't have the proper tools, we don't give the proper resources and the space for people to engage with the hidden pain that we have of emotional and mental, the realities of them can be just as impactful as the physical pain,
Yes.
and we have to treat both with the same seriousness and attention so that we are not fully consumed, going back to being consumed again, being consumed by either one. So significantly that we cannot function, we do not know how to care for ourselves. Or like with Rose in Smile, it's being caught up in this thing that no one else sees but you. And you have no idea what it is, but it is now your life.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember when I was first starting therapy and everything, and I was just sort of like, that thing where we talked about benchmarks. And at one point,
Yes.
I was like, okay, well, it's been 2 months since the breakup, 3 months. I was like, how come I'm not feeling better, right? Like, because that's the approach that I was having towards it.
Right.
And he was like, let me ask you something. He was like, if you had a friend of yours who got into a really awful car crash, and they had like, crushed their kneecap, right, and needed therapy and everything, would you go to them like 2 months from now, like, how come you're not walking right? You should be running around by now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you've been getting physical therapy. How come you're not getting better? He was like, you would never tell somebody that, because again,
Exactly.
in American culture, we understand physical pain,
Right.
right? But like, so he was like, so why would you ask yourself that emotionally? Like, he was like, it's a wound. It's just
Yeah.
mentally and emotionally.
Right.
So you can't apply the same, he was like, the same care and empathy that you would have somebody that was injured physically. That's how you have to approach yourself and people in
Yes.
your life who've experienced an emotional injury or a mental injury, or mental health challenges. You don't expect them. You're not giving them a timeline, right,
Yes.
together, which is interesting because there was a scene in the movie. Well, going back to that, there was a scene where when she broke up with her boyfriend did seem to be a little impatient with her,
Yes.
right? Like, what is wrong with you? And then I love what she said. She snapped at him again, trauma response, but there was truth in what she was saying. She was like, "You just want everything to be perfect.
Yep.
Everything is like the relationship. You're fine with the relationship when I'm happy and I'm the loving girlfriend and everything. And now that I'm going through some crisis, like, it was almost like she was like, why can't you be there for me?"
Yes.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yes. And people don't know what to do with pain, trauma, grief. They don't know because they want to fix it.
Yes, especially men.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Especially
People
men.
want to fix it, and people expect you to be, like you were saying, at the benchmarks over time. It's like, no, there is no benchmark when it comes to grief, when it comes to emotional, mental pain and trauma, things of that nature. There are no benchmarks. You are just doing your best every day, no matter what that may look like, and how you're handling it and growing with it and so forth. And I think that's the frustration part with our society, is that we want people to just snap out of it
Mm,
and be better for our comfort. We're not thinking about nobody else. We're not thinking about how that person may be dealing with it. We're thinking about our own uncomfortable nature of seeing this person going through something that we cannot help them with. We
yeah.
cannot control, or at least think we can. And it's really a projection.
Wow.
That's a projection of helplessness on our end in seeing someone that we care about going through something that we cannot prevent, we cannot stop, we don't have a say so over. And that's something we have to recognize if we're going to be a support for people who have gone through trauma or going through grieving or some other hidden pain, is that we have to be mindful of our own projections as to what that quote unquote should look like and where they quote unquote should be based on how we think we would be.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. Well, I think we will end it right there.
Oh, this
So,
has been great.
yeah, thank you. So, and I have to tell you that, like, just like even talking to you, like, I'm feeling healing happening in that, because it's like, when things happen to you, you feel like there's a shame where you feel like, oh my
Yes.
God, it's my fault and whatever. And you just sometimes don't even want to talk about it, because then it almost feels like you talking about it. It's almost like you're indicting yourself all over again.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I think it's great, like, when you can just say, like, this is the thing that hurt me. Like, this is what it is. And hopefully, I hope people who listen, and thank you so much, Melissa. I'm hoping that people who listen to this podcast, hopefully whatever journey that they're on, hopefully that they'll get something out of it too.
Yes. And I do want to say, to the point you're making, that there is no shame in how you're feeling. How you feel is valid. No matter how long it's been or how deep the hurt is, that pain is valid, and to not be ashamed or to feel like something is wrong when it's not. It's just a part of being human. And I think sometimes we have to find ways to recognize our own humanity in a world that wants to strip us of that, it seems like, from every corner.